X-Chromosome Aneuploidy, Module 2, Lecture 2 in the Genetic Series. Sex chromosomes are different than all the autosomes in that they can look different. Females have two X's, but males have an X and a Y. One of the X chromosomes in females, because they have additional genetic material, is actually turned off. This is usually a random event. Some cells, the maternal copy of the X chromosome is inactivated, while in other cells, the paternal copy is turned off. This occurs early in development. The cells that precede the cells that the paternal copy is turned off also have the paternal copy turned off, and those with the maternal copy inactivated, those propagating cells also have the same. So here we have a diagram. Here's the paternal X and the maternal X. In some cells, the paternal X is turned off, and this is also, it's one of the latest replicating chromosomes and is known as the bar body. And in other cells, the maternal copy is turned off. Features of X inactivation: the inactivation of most of the genes is on the X chromosome that is inactive. And as stated, this is usually a random event that occurs during development. The inactive X is also known as the bar body with late replicating DNA and expresses the X-IST of RNA, and that helps for the inactivation. As I said, most of the X is activated, but there are areas that escape inactivation. So here's the X-IST. This is the region that spreads inactivation in both the long and the short arm. But there are areas, especially at the short arm of the X chromosome, that escape inactivation. There's a little bit on the long arm as well. Translocations involving the X chromosome. This can be very difficult because one of the X's is inactivated. Translocation of an X chromosome to an autosome can result in a genetic imbalance even if technically it's balanced. Here we have an example. Here the X's, when we have two normal X's, they're randomly inactivated. When one of the X's is abnormal, either has a duplication of X material or maybe a translocation from another chromosome, this chromosome is actually non-randomly inactivated. So instead of the random X inactivation, which is the rule, when there is an abnormal X, nature tries to compensate by inactivating it. So instead of there being a random X inactivation, the abnormal X is preferentially inactivated. However, when there's a balanced rearrangement, here's our X chromosome, here's an autosome. If there's a translocation between the long arm of an X chromosome and the long arm of, let's just make it up, chromosome 1, if we inactivate this abnormal X, it results in partial trisomy of chromosome X with a partial monosomy, because this material that's of chromosome 1 origin will actually be inactivated because the spreading inactivation spreads in both directions, and it's not dependent on whether it's X chromosome material. So in order to provide balance, nature actually inactivates the normal X in a balanced X autosomal translocation. Let's look at the genes on the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome specifically determines male sex. The vast majority is repetitive DNA. There's a pseudo-autosomal region on both the long and short arms, and this actually has crossover with the X chromosome. But one of the most important genes that determine male is SRY, and then the DAZ genes are also very important with regards to azoospermia. So in nature, there's a bipotential gonad. If there's SRY present, that gonad becomes a testes. If there's not, it goes the passive way and becomes female external genitalia and ovary. So next we're going to talk about sex chromosome aneuploidy. Having an additional copy of the X chromosome in a male is a relatively common event. It occurs in about 1 in 1,000. The fortunate thing about this is we can inactivate one of these X's. Having an extra Y chromosome is also a relatively common event occurring about 1 in 1,000. Loss of a chromosome, Turner syndrome is the only loss of a chromosome that's compatible with life that occurs in about 1 in 5,000 live-borns, and having an extra copy of the X chromosome occurs in about 1 in 1,000. Clinical features of Klinefelters: they're usually a little bit taller than average male. They have infertility and some learning problems. The XYY, a little bit taller. They usually have, so males with XYY have usually normal sexual development, normal fertility, and normal intelligence. They can have some behavioral problems. Having an additional copy of the X chromosome, or XXX, again, the females are a little bit taller. They usually have normal development, mild behavioral problems, and then Turner syndrome, they're usually shorter. So there's got to be some height genes on the X chromosomes and the Y. When there's extra copies, they're taller. When there's only a single copy, they're shorter. They have infertility with streaked gonads, but normal intelligence. So, Turner syndrome, complete or partial loss of the X chromosome, occurs in 1 in 5,000 females. However, it's one of the most common causes of pregnancy loss. 99% are miscarried. Either the mother or father could not give a sex chromosome. Newborns sometimes have specific findings such as puffy hands and puffy feet and this webbing of the neck. This is a board type question. Most Turner syndrome females, however, are not diagnosed till age 5 to 6 because of short stature and, again, sometimes the webbing of the neck, a shield chest with wide-spaced nipples. They can have a specific cardiac defect, usually left-sided coarctation of the aorta. Klinefelter syndrome, XXY, occurs in 1 in 5,000. While they do have some cognitive deficits, usually IQ is about 10 to 15 points below siblings. Often, again, not diagnosed in the newborn period, although with some of the newer prenatal techniques, we're starting to see it more. Tall stature, behavioral problems, and post-pubertal small testes. They can also have gynecomastia. And because of the gynecomastia, they're at equal risk to females of developing breast cancer. XYY, again, 1 in 1,000. Because it's the Y chromosome and only dad has the Y chromosome, it's non-disjunction from the father. Clinical features include tall stature, over-genetic height, IQ about 10 to 15 points lower than siblings, but normal fertility, although I would expect more males and Klinefelters from a male that has XYY. Gonadal Dysgenesis. Well, as a rule, XX is a female and XY is a male. One thing about genetics is there's exceptions to every rule. The SRY gene is located on the Y chromosome. If the SRY gene is translocated to the X chromosome, it can result in XX, SRY, resulting in external genitalia or an XX male. If the XY individual has a deletion of the SRY region, it can result in an XY female. So here we have the problem with the SRY is it's very close to the area, the pseudo-autosomal region where there's crossing over. If the crossover occurs a little bit too low, we end up with the SRY and the X chromosome and an XX male, or loss of the SRY on the Y chromosome and XY female. Here we have another diagram of here the SRY is supposed to be on the Y. This is what's supposed to happen, but if the crossing over occurs a little bit too far down, we end up with SRY being translocated onto the X chromosome. Female pseudohermaphrodites, 46XX with a male phenotype. This most commonly occurs because of an endocrinologic disorder known as congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is an inherited disorder that increases steroids, resulting in masculinization of the external genitalia. But this individual would have normal female internal genitalia. Male pseudohermaphrodite, the SRY gene on the Y chromosome, as stated, is the most common to be responsible for the male phenotype. Female genitalia is a passive development. Male genitalia requires a number of genes on the Y chromosome. A female-appearing genitalia can also result from an X-linked recessive disorder known as androgen insensitivity, when the testosterone sensitivity is not responded on the cell. Although testosterone is secreted, the endoorgan tissue is unresponsive. So this could be an XY with female external genitalia. So, a 14-year-old male has gynecomastia, small testes, and chromosome analysis found to have an additional copy of the X chromosome. Which of the following is the patient at increased risk for? Increased risk for testicular cancer, increased risk for breast cancer, increased risk for autism, increased risk for seizures, or increased risk for short stature. This concludes the lecture on cytogenetics in the sex